every person deserves access to clean water,
safe, affordable food,
and a livable climate.
I want to be part of a world that is fighting to make this vision a reality, and that's why I'm at Food and Water Watch.
Food and Water Watch's mission is to oppose corporate control and abuse of our most vital resources and ensure that government fulfills its obligation to protect our health, our communities, and our environment.
I saw the need for an environmental organization that would not be afraid to call for bold solutions to the problems we face. And the issues we work on are life and death issues.
Whether it's stopping water shutoffs for unpaid bills or stopping a power plant in somebody's backyard.
We've helped build out international movements against water privatization, fracking, and against fossil fuels.
We combine hard-hitting research, on-the-ground organizing, aggressive legal tactics, and deep policy work to make sure that we are aligned to get the policies that we need, whether it's the local, state, federal, or even global level.
Research, especially the way we do it here in Food and Water Watch, is pivotal. The process we have here, which is a lot of rigorous fact-checking, a lot of review, a lot of collaboration, ensures that we arm our organizers and our supporters with the most thorough and definitive and important information and facts.
Our goal is to give people a sense of their own power.
We win the fights other people say we can't, and we win fights against insurmountable odds.
Food and Water Watch has a consistent winning track record.
We're never going to have the money the oil and gas industry has. What we have is people power, and we've seen over and over and over again, when we organize locally, we win, and we win even against some of the biggest money that's out there in the political world.
It takes real people power to win, and that's what we're out here doing, building a movement.
While the challenges are enormous, they are not insurmountable, and there is still much to fight for.
By mobilizing and empowering communities and fostering grassroots leadership, I believe Food and Water Watch will help shape a world where environmental justice is not just a goal, but a reality.
Food and Water Watch. Fight like you live here.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Food and Water Watch's October Livable Future Live. Tonight, we will be talking with authors Sharon Udasin and Rachel Frazin about their book, Poisoning the Well, How Forever Chemicals Contaminated America. My name is Jeanine Scheffert. I am Food and Water Watch's Senior Manager of Philanthropy Events, and I will be your host this evening. Thank you so much for being here. As people are joining, please take a moment to introduce yourself in the chat. We would love to see your name, where you're joining us from, and what brings you here today. For any of you new to Food and Water Watch, welcome. We are a national organization fighting for safe food, clean water, and a livable climate for all. We organize for grassroots activism at all levels of government, local, state, and federal, and we work to create the change and solutions we need. And for any of you new to Livable Future Live, welcome. This is our monthly virtual education series. Each month, we focus on a different topic relative to our livable future. Tonight, we'll be talking to authors Sharon Udasin and Rachel Frazin, discussing their book, Poisoning the Well, How Forever Chemicals Contaminated America. And next month, on Wednesday, November 19th, we'll be talking about profiteering off the nation's food crisis. And in December, we'll finish out the year by featuring a few really impactful stories from some of our frontline volunteers. I hope you'll join us for both events. We'll put a link to sign up for those in the chat. Before we get started, I want to take a moment to acknowledge that we are all coming together in community today with a diverse set of backgrounds, perspectives, and experiences, but with a common belief in the importance of fighting for clean water, clean food, and a livable future for all. As you share your thoughts and questions in the comments, please make sure to keep them respectful. We do have someone monitoring the chat, and we will ask anyone not abiding by this request to leave the event. A few quick notes about Zoom before we get started. If you'd like to turn on closed captioning to add subtitles to your screen, click Show Captions in your Zoom toolbar. We'll add instructions for that in the chat as well. Please use this chat box throughout the evening to share your thoughts and your reactions to what you're hearing. The chat is also where we will share information and links, so keep an eye out for those. As you see in this slide, there is a separate icon to click for typing questions you want to ask the authors. So the chat box is for talking to other attendees and sharing and receiving information, and the Q&A box is to ask questions directly to our speakers. And we have set aside time near the end for audience Q&A. And finally, I am recording this event, and I will share the recording with you in an email I'll send out tomorrow. Tonight, we'll be talking a lot about PFAS contamination, which is something that Food and Water Watch works to fight every day. We're proud of our 20 years of wins, but we couldn't do any of it without people like you stepping up to take action. It's the people power that gets this work done. So thank you for being here. And please consider making a donation, joining our volunteer network, and attending more events. We don't take any corporate funding, so we are not beholden to the special interests other than the health of our communities and our planet. Our support comes from people like you, so thank you so much for your generosity. Tonight, I am honored to be talking to authors Rachel Frazin and Sharon Udasin. Sharon has been an environmental reporter for 15 years and was a TED Scripps Fellow in Environmental Journalism in 2019 to 2020. Rachel is an environment and energy reporter at The Hill with previous work in the Chicago Sun-Times, the Daily Beast, Tampa Bay Times, and the Palm Beach Post. Both Sharon and Rachel are recipients of SEAL Environmental Journalism Awards. They are co-authors of Poisoning the Well, How Forever Chemicals Contaminated America. Sharon and Rachel, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having us.
Yes, thanks for having us.
So Sharon, let's start with you. I just introduced you both as reporters, and I know that between the two of you, you've covered everything from gasoline prices to toxic chemicals to renewable energy and fossil fuels, environment and agriculture. I hear that you were the one who first suggested this book. What led you to write a book about PFAS?
So Rachel and I worked together at The Hill for several years, but very early on, we somehow discovered our mutual fascination with PFAS, as one does. So for me, the astounding thing about PFAS compared to other pollutants is their just inability to break down in the environment and their persistence, but we'll get to that later. Anyway, we ended up writing a series of articles at The Hill that explored the numerous legal obstacles PFAS pollution victims face when seeking justice for potential injury or property damage. And when that was published in early 2022, I believe, yes, I started thinking about how there's no comprehensive book on PFAS out there yet that really explores the issue on a national scale. I felt like we'd be so well equipped to fill that hole. So I suggested to Rachel that we once again join forces and work on a book. And from there, it was many month process of writing a proposal, finding an agent, and securing a publisher. And the rest is history. It was that simple.
Yeah, to echo what Sharon said, we did the series and we felt like it was really, rewarding for us to spread that information. It was really good for the public to spread that information, but we felt like that was sort of just one aspect of what we see as a really, really immense issue. And so, when Sharon said, let's write a book, I pretty much immediately was like, yes, let's dig deeper. Let's create a resource that tells sort of the story broadly so that people can have something to turn to for where do I even begin with this?
Yeah, and I'm so glad you did. So Rachel, you cite this terrifying statistic in the book, which is that 97% of us living in the US have PFAS coursing through our veins. Where does that stat come from? And how do I know if I have PFAS in my blood?
That stat comes from a CDC study. Actually, the CDC's description of their study lists 97%, but then when you click through, a lot of the times the actual study, it looks like some of these chemicals are found in 98 or 99% of us. So I would guess that the 97 might even be an undercount. I think that it's pretty safe to assume, frankly, that if you live here, you have PFAS in your blood. And now that's not just an America problem, although America certainly is a big part of the problem. But, a lot of developed countries where they're doing these studies all around the world, they're finding similar levels. So I think this stuff really has infiltrated most people alive today.
Yeah, it's terrifying. Sharon, let's back up here a little bit. So PFAS have been in the news a lot lately, but the term is a technical one. For anyone who is unfamiliar, what are PFAS and why should I care if they're in my blood or in the environment?
So it's an acronym for per and polyfluoroalkyl substances. I know that tells you a lot. These are synthetic, man-made organofluorines, which means that they're organic compounds that contain a carbon-fluorine bond. And there are about 15,000 of them is the current estimate, but that estimate changes all the time because a lot of times what happens is you get rid of one, you create three others. So that's a moving figure. That's the very basic of what they are. But they are in so many things that I'm sure that every single person listening or tuning into this webinar has something on their body that contains PFAS in it because they're that ubiquitous.
And can you also, and I think earlier we already used the phrase forever chemicals, but why are they called forever chemicals?
Me or Rachel?
Yeah. Sorry.
Okay, me. Okay, so that's due to their persistence, and they essentially do not break down at all in the environment. In the human body, they can eventually break down, but they linger some of them for several years by binding to proteins in the blood. And it's of concern because they have been proven to have numerous effects. There's scientific research occurring about plenty of other diseases, but some already that have links are testicular cancer, there's kidney cancer, thyroid disease, there are some reproductive effects, immunological defects. The list goes on, and there's new research happening every day. But again, we can't avoid it. Like we're all I see the three of us are probably wearing makeup and have some sort of cosmetic that might contain PFAS in it without us knowing, because they have really convenient properties, the waterproof, stain-proof, all kinds of things like that.
Yeah, thank you. So Rachel, knowing that, it's easy for me to see that PFAS are terrifying and dangerous and need to be regulated and ideally eliminated. But in the book, while describing these dangers, you also tell the history of how we got to where we are today. And many of the products that were introducing these chemicals were kind of thought of as miracle products when they were first introduced. They were designed to enhance or even save lives. Tell us a little bit about the beginning of some of these products and why were people so initially so excited about what PFAS can do?
Well, the thing here is that while these chemicals do have really toxic effects, they're not all bad, right? They are useful, and that's why and how they have proliferated so much. They were invented in the 1930s by accident by the company DuPont. Some of their earliest uses and still some of their most ubiquitous uses are in nonstick pans. They also were used originally in fishing line. And they've been used over the years in really important things, ranging from heart valves to firefighting foam that can put out jet fuel-based fires to they're now used in semiconductors today. So many of our, really important technologies are based in or use these chemicals. Again, as Sharon said, they can be waterproof, stain-proof, stain-resistant. Another early use was in like Scotch Guard or one of those stain-resistant sprays. They've been used in some of that stain-resistant carpeting, stain-resistant furniture. And so originally people were like, wow, this is great. My eggs don't stick to the pan. This saves me time, lets me hang out with my family, gives me, saves some elbow grease. But, unfortunately, we've learned over the years that they've also been linked to a lot of uh, major health problems.
Right. And speaking of which, Rachel, you uncovered evidence of two specific companies, 3M and DuPont. becoming actively aware early on that their products were connected to dangerous health risks. At what point, in your opinion, do the manufacturers of these products cross that line away from hero companies and towards something more nefarious? Walk us through their response to learning about the health harms of their products and manufacturing processes.
I would say it's difficult to like pinpoint one specific day and say, okay, they knew here, but there is a ton of evidence that these companies had, even relatively early on, that their products could be harmful and toxic. A couple of things that stick out is there's a DuPont memo from the early 1960s that like describes them as hazardous and says they should be handled with extreme care. Studies from DuPont from the 60s also find damage to dog organs and rat organs. And on the dog study specifically, they wrote in their memo this might be useful in detecting, the health impacts in humans and understanding what it's doing like to our employees. Um, by the 70s, or in the 70s rather, researchers at 3M, which is another major maker and user of these chemicals, um, they were presented with information from outside researchers, people at 3M. They were presented researchers from the University of Florida and elsewhere have said, hey, we're finding fluorine in the environment. Could this fluorine be from these products that you guys make with the carbon fluorine bonds? And 3M basically told them, nope, wasn't us. But these researchers in the 70s were finding fluorine in so many people's bodies, and were finding it to be a pretty widespread spread problem even then.
I would also add that just so that we don't forget another element here, the military was also quite part of this as well. Just as DuPont and 3M might have been doing these toxicological reports, so too was the military at the same time. Rachel mentioned before that a big use of PFAS historically was this foam to fight jet fuel-based fires, which was developed in tandem, like between the Navy and 3M. And the Air Force and the Army and the larger Department of Defense was also exploring the toxic effects of these chemicals.
And they also had studies, dating back to the 80s, also warning of the health impacts of these chemicals.
And what was their response when they learned that there was potential health risks?
To be honest with you, I think it probably varied, but on the whole, I'm not aware of a major effort for many, many years to do something about it, right? Eventually, they started to act, but like eventually, probably 5 or 10 years ago, there were changes made, but they were required to use this firefighting foam for a very long time because, there weren't necessarily alternatives. Now research has started into, developing that. But for a long time, it was difficult to find alternatives and it was considered a safety tool. They used it though, not only in emergencies, but also in training exercises. But,
And as Rachel said, it really did vary, and it could vary on a very local level. Like as we saw in the book in Colorado, just down the road from each other was U.S. Army's Fort Carson and the Peterson Space Force Base. And Fort Carson stopped using the foam, not the phone, in training purposes already, actually in the mid 1990s. And like a decade or 2 decades before its neighbor. So it could vary like on that minute of a scale because they are really 10 minutes away from each other.
Wow. Okay, thank you. So Sharon, let's talk about some of the people who have been affected by these companies and military practices. So far, we've been talking about the chemicals and the corporations and the military, but at its heart, this book is really about the people, I think. The book starts in the town of North Cortland, Alabama. It's rural, it's deep south. We meet Brenda Hampton, who takes you on a drive. Tell us about Brenda and the tour she takes you on.
That drive, and each of us actually went on that drive separately, and we were there at different times. And we came to just call this drive Brenda's Death Tour. The thing about Brenda is like, she was just a regular person who in 2015, she was undergoing a managerial transfer for McDonald's from Boston to Tennessee. And during her physical, she just discovered, the doctors told her she was in renal failure and kidney failure, and that she had been exposed to something toxic. And that kind of sent her going back home to Cortland, her small town of Cortland, where um, she could be with her family instead of doing this managerial transfer. And she's a hugely curious person. She very quickly discovered that in these two twin small towns, she found like 54 cases of cancer and 14 of kidney failure in two streets alone. And the thing about Alabama is it has an immense lack of environmental regulation slash enforcement. And Brenda really took it upon herself to invite scientists to the area and to recruit other activists to her side to actually get something done. And she was part of the driving force of one of many settlements with 3M that occurred in the region. But although she did that, she did it kind of at a personal risk. Like she has described like being there was a Chucky doll left in her car. She doesn't know by whom, tires slashed, et cetera, et cetera. But she has just kept going because she really cares about the health of her community. And I just felt so connected to her story to begin with. And she's just a gripping person and really, I guess one of the heroes of this book.
Yeah. Yeah, I am seeing in the chat too that people are saying that they found her story to be both heartbreaking and inspiring, and I definitely agree. So Sharon, the book goes on to tell the stories of 4 specific towns that have similarly oversized death and illness tolls. How are these towns related to each other, and are they representative of the average town in the US?
Well, they're related to each other simply because they have PFAS pollution problems. And actually, the activists in most of the places now know each other but that's because of PFAS that they know each other. They've come together as kind of a national driving force. But each of the 4 places that we chose are facing PFAS problems that are unique among themselves, but representative of dozens of other places nationwide. Really, we could have chosen numerous other places, but the stories of the people in these places were both riveting and relatable to us. And the findings we uncovered in many of them were so striking. So the 4 places we had. We were just talking about Brenda, so that was in northern Alabama. The small city of Decatur and adjacent small towns of Cortland and a few others nearby. And in that place, we looked at industrial contamination of dumping basically into the Tennessee River that ended up in drinking water. We had North Carolina, Wilmington, which is a coastal city, and looked at like corporate corruption and kicking the can down the line, and just in general, like a whack-a-mole approach to both PFAS and to corporate structure. Then we had Maine, southern slash central Maine, where we looked at the agricultural applications because there was PFAS in a substance called sludge that is basically semi-solids left over from wastewater treatment. And the state was encouraging farmers to apply this to their land as nutritious fertilizer. And in Maine's case, it was because they just had a lack of dump space. And so they kind of posed this as a win-win for farmers and the state. And then the last one is fairly close to where I'm in Boulder, Colorado. So 2 hours south of me, El Paso County, Colorado Springs area. We looked at the military contamination effects, largely at Peterson Space Force Base.
And just to jump in here, we picked each of these places because we felt that they were indicative of, a unique but important facet of the problem. We thought that through Alabama, we could help to tell the broader history of the industrial contamination and tell the stories, of people who live near or downstream from polluting facilities. In Colorado, we thought, well, we can tell, the story of people who live probably near hundreds of military bases around this country. In Maine is not the only place with agriculture problems where they've spread sludge. And, there's places like New Mexico, for example, where this is a problem. And so we thought that, that story could help encapsulate sort of the broader problem we now have in our agriculture system. And in North Carolina, that really gets at sort of where this problem is going. It's another story of industrial contamination, but it's sort of at least in the later years, it was a different chemical. And we were sort of using that to show, the way that they sort of tweak the chemistries and that the replacements here can also be dangerous. And just because, the EPA has figured out one doesn't mean they've figured out the entirety of the problem. And, while these places do represent other similar places around the country, luckily, not every place in America is contaminated to this degree, right? Like it is in probably all of us, but the people in our book most of them are probably exposed at much higher levels than you or I.
Right. So, Rachel, like so many environmental issues, it sounds like some communities are disproportionately negatively affected. And Brenda even alludes to this in the introduction of the book when she talks about North Cortland having a legacy of slavery and a less developed, slow-paced rural culture, which she says is, quote, why they are still taking advantage of Alabama. Nobody goes by any rules. Nobody questions anything. Now, when I read something like this, I have so many feelings at once. Firstly, I get so mad at the ability and the willingness of moneyed interests to really recklessly take advantage of human lives. But it also brings up this concept of othering. And I think it's really easy for us as humans to unconsciously other places that feel different or far away from us. And in this case, if I'm not from the Deep South, maybe I read this and I get angry, but maybe there's also a small part of me that feels like, oh, thank goodness, it's far away from me. Maybe my family is safe. And conversely, if the story does take place somewhere close to me, I might think this is so specific to this place. Who else will possibly care? So my question for you is this: what do you see as the role of reporters and authors to combat this othering phenomenon and bring us together around issues like PFAS? And do we all need to be worried about this level of contamination in our own communities?
That's a really good question. And I think for PFAS, it's kind of a yes and. Yes, this is disproportionately impacting communities, with historic contamination and, it may be impacting some communities that, are lower income but it may be impacting disproportionately communities that are not you, that are far away from you, but it's also impacting you. Another sort of important thing to note about PFAS is that they're mobile. They move. The theory is that they can get absorbed into the rainwater and pass through. So while the contamination may not be happening in your neighborhood, it might be happening to you through your air, through your water, through the products that you use. And so it's sort of a yes and no, but I think as reporters, it really is important for us to tell those stories, both, the person that you can empathize with, even if they are far away, but also to explain sort of the scale and scope of the problem that we're dealing with here.
Yeah.
I would just also add, and or another responsibility I think that we have is just to make it relatable. And actually, because a lot of this is so like technical, and we want people to actually read and connect with it. And so that's kind of one I don't want to say advantage because I don't want to take advantage of the people in the story, but like that having all of these narratives threaded within there kind of I think helps people connect with it better.
Absolutely. I think that's part of what draws us in and makes us understand the more technical parts too. And so speaking of which, I guess this question is for both of you. As you traveled across the US to these different towns, you collected so much devastating information, but you also met some people like Brenda who really stand out as heroes of these stories and who are fighting back in different ways. Who are some of these other heroes and what kind of stories did they share with you?
I'll share two briefly. I wanted to share Mark Favors, who is from the Colorado Springs area, although now he is a nurse in New York City. But his almost all of his family still lives in Colorado Springs, and they are essentially all veterans, and more than 2 dozen people in his family have suffered from serious illnesses that they believe is PFAS related. And there were at least 5 kidney related illnesses. And I would like to emphasize that these are not people that are necessarily related to each other. This is an expansive family with like step siblings, cousin-in-laws, like this is not necessarily a genetic issue. And Mark really just came across the PFAS issue locally when he was visiting his mother in late 2018 and saw a local newscast. And from there, he just kept digging, and he's brought this issue to Congress regularly because he wants to see a congressional investigation happen into this issue because he believes there's very minimal chance for legal recourse. And the second person I wanted to briefly mention before passing it on to Rachel is Fred Stone in Maine, because he was one of the farmers who actually did some of the most sludge spreading throughout the state of Maine with the encouragement of the state. He admits it, he knows it. He has the permits saying that he could do so and that it would not pollute the waters of the state of Maine already back from the 80s. But he has like taken responsibility and he got when he first found out that his area was contaminated, he got his cow's milk tested. He jeopardized his own business, this dairy business that's been in his family for 100 years. It is now crumbled to nothing. And they're in like bankruptcy, etc. And he kind of helped drive a lot of the legislation, the forward-thinking legislation that the state of Maine has implemented. And the last thing about him is that he says, I'm not an activist. Like, I am not an organic farmer, but yet I just wanted people's water to be clean, which is a basic right.
In North Carolina, you've got so many folks doing the good work, fighting the good fight, people, who are fighting for their community, people like Emily Donovan, people like Dana Sargent, who, both of these women worked at, or maybe not worked, well, both these women were affiliated with, advocacy organizations that worked to do all kinds of things, including pushing for action at the national level, pushing for action at the state level, at the local level, but also taking questions and calls from their neighbors as they were learning about these issues on the fly. Dana was telling me that, when we were writing the book, still people were coming to her calling like, hey, I just learned that this isn't our water, even though it sort of first hit the presses, in the mid 2010s over there. But people now don't always have that information at their fingertips or aren't always paying attention to every article, in the local newspaper. And we're just realizing like, damn, my water is contaminated, and, have sort of continued to provide the education as well as, doing the activism. And I think something else that's worth noting, especially, in this time of government shutdown, is that, I had the opportunity to talk to a lot of people who were former EPA officials and former EPA workers. And I think a lot of them, even though, obviously these agencies and a lot of people will say the agencies did not act fast enough, did not do enough. And I understand that perspective, and you can make the case that you want for people at the top, but there were people sort of in the rank and file doing the work, conducting the studies, conducting the science to get us to the knowledge that we have today.
Yeah, thank you. I love that this theme kind of keeps coming up of people, sharing their information and supporting one another, and that people power of making things happen. Rachel, let's talk a little bit more about government regulation. It seems to me that in an ideal world, we have a government that protects us from industrial contamination instead of subsidizing it. Whose job is this, and why isn't it working?
It's a big question. So to take you back sort of into the history of chemical regulation, and I promise I'll get to PFAS and to where we are today, but if just bear with me. Um, in the 1970s, when the US passed its first chemicals law, the Toxic Substances Control Act for the EPA, which, by the way, the EPA was not even invented until 1970. So before that, everything would have gone through the FDA. But in 1976, when they passed the first chemicals law, part of that compromise was every chemical that was already out there was grandfathered in. And that included a lot of the most notorious PFAS, including PFOA and PFOS. So those were basically just assumed safe until we learned that they weren't in the late 1990s. Um, and still, it took years. And basically, what ended up happening in the 2000s with that was that the EPA came to agreements with the manufacturers of the two PFAS that they were learning were really problematic, and they all kind of agreed to stop making those two PFAS in the US for the most part by like 2015 was sort of was the agreement. But the EPA sort of later learned that this is a problem that goes way beyond those two PFAS, and so many more of them, so many more of these forever chemicals are still to this day being made and used. And dumped into our drinking water and coming out of our faucets and being used in our products. And um, in 2024, the Biden administration did take a big step, which was to regulate six PFAS in our drinking water. And basically, what the rule that they passed said was that, if a water utility finds that they have PFOA, PFOS, Gen X, or three others in their drinking water, they have to test. Well, first of all, they have to test to see if they have them, and if they have them, they have to put a filter. The Trump administration has come in and changed that a bit. First, they moved the deadline back. Under the Biden rule, they would have had to have that filtration in by 2029. Now it's going to be 2031. The Trump folks haven't made that change yet, but they've announced that change. They plan to propose that change. So it seems like they're giving water utilities 2 extra years, and that might mean 2 extra years for some of us drinking that contaminated water. And the other thing that they're doing is they took four of those PFAS out of the rule. So now it only applies to those two historic PFAS, PFOA and PFOS. And what that's going to mean is not totally clear at this point, to be honest with you, because a lot of times these PFAS are co-occurring. They occur in mixtures. And if you have Gen X in your water, which, for example, is no longer in the rule under the Trump administration's plans, you might still have PFOA or PFOS, and so you may still get that filtration technology that will cover your water and will still filter out that Gen X, even if it's not covered by the rule. But if you don't, if you only have,
PFHXS.
PFHXS or PFBS is the other one, or any number of other PFAS, you're still drinking PFAS contaminated water unless your water utility takes the steps on their own or you take the steps on your own to get water filtration. The other thing I would note about this is that these rules only cover public utilities, or they don't cover private wells. So if your house is on your land and you pump your water from a well, you would not be covered by this, because I mean it's really hard to regulate every individual well owner's well. But you might still be drinking contaminated water. Another sort of big ask that I hear from activists, which has not yet been done, both the Biden administration and the Trump administration, the new Trump administration, have said they want to do this, is to turn off the taps, is to put some sort of limit on how much of this stuff companies can release into the water and the air in the first place. And those can be sort of hodgepodge, permit by permit, state by state, but there's not any national limit.
And I wanted to also add that some states do, like, regardless of what the federal government is doing, do have certain limits that are in place and on various like different types of PFAS depending on the area. So we're not 100% only dependent on the federal government to set these filtration rules, but obviously that's the overarching regulator here.
Thank you. And I see that Katie's putting some links in the chat here that includes some places that you can look state by state, what the situation is. So Sharon, what can be done at this point, scientifically speaking, to rid our bodies and our water systems of PFAS, knowing that these are considered forever chemicals?
Well, to rid our bodies, we can be more careful about the products we use. So be more careful about the products that we're putting into our bodies, what we're exposing ourselves to by being more conscious of labels, looking for things like waterproof, stain-proof. That doesn't necessarily mean there's PFAS because there are now alternative things that make things waterproof or stain-proof, but it might be a red flag that you should do more research. Another way of ridding your bodies of PFAS is simply by having a menstrual cycle. Like a period actually kind of takes out a decent amount of PFAS. There are also studies now about of the idea of like donating blood, not for actual use, but to kind of, there's some studies of firefighters who had been very much exposed to PFAS. And so by removing some of the blood, then you kind of can lose some of the PFAS. But as far as drinking water is concerned, there are three main technologies that remove PFAS from water. There's granular activated carbon, which is like a spongy carbon based materials sort of trap the PFAS as water rushes through. PFAS is kind of attracted to the material and fill in these pores. There's one called ion exchange, in which a resin dotted with positively charged beads is like soaked in salt water, attracting negatively charged chloride ions. And when PFAS polluted water enters into the system, the negatively charged PFAS ions swap places with chloride, which binds to sodium in the water and generates a non-harmful salt and PFAS-laden resin. Now, with these two, you have the two I just mentioned. You have the carbon sponge filled with PFAS. In this case, you have the resin also filled with PFAS. So those are two interesting ones. The third one is reverse osmosis, in which a semi-permeable membrane basically bars PFAS and other contaminants from passing through. And in a lot of those cases, the highly PFAS contaminated waste just goes right down the drain. So in all three of these cases, you are removing PFAS, but you're not totally dealing with the problem. But luckily, there are scientists around the world who are dealing with the problem, and some of their solutions are even close to, I wouldn't say like market ready, but like commercial pilot commercial scale. I'm not going to go through how each of them works, but three main categories you'll hear if you want to Google: electrochemical oxidation, low temperature plasma treatment, sonolysis. Basically, these scientists are breaking apart the unbreakable, the carbon fluorine bond, which is just this like thing that we thought was like really impermeable. They are succeeding in breaking it apart. So the idea is, maybe you would send your carbon filter that's stocked with PFAS over to a reactor that is capable of then taking that PFAS in concentrate and breaking it down. And as I said, it is succeeding on a pilot level. But we have to look at this as a planetary scale issue. Treating the entire planet of this problem is going to take a lot of time and a lot of money.
Yeah. Thank you. I want to take a minute before we shift to audience questions to focus on fighting back. And at the very end of this call, my colleague Mary will come on to name a specific action we can all take. But let's name this. Who has the power to change this situation, and what can we do to push for these changes?
There's a lot of people at a lot of different levels who have a lot of different levers, right? You've got the companies that make and use these products, and as consumers, you can vote with your dollars, you can give them a call. At the local level, you can talk to your water utility, ask them what they're doing, ask them if you have PFAS in their water, ask if they've tested yet and what they've found. You've got, again, local politicians who can push for those kind of changes for you. You've got state level politicians who can make those state level laws. You've got national politicians, not only at the EPA, but also in Congress who, can take on these issues from that perch. So it really is sort of, because this is such an all-encompassing issue, there are a lot of people with a lot of power here, and I know that might be overwhelming and daunting, and your specific action may depend on the specific scenario. If I would say if your water is really highly contaminated, I would first be going local, but it's a complex one.
Yeah,
I
thanks.
I would also say as consumers, and this is something I said before, we have that power as well, and you can basically convince companies not to use these chemicals in their products just by the power of the purse, really. Like for example, in the area I live in Colorado, outdoor activities are very, very popular, and so there's a lot of like outdoor apparel companies, ski companies that are really rooted here. And they've basically responded to the idea that consumers don't want PFAS in their snowproof jackets or in their ski wax. And now, if you go downtown, you'll see like that the stores will say PFAS-free apparel, or if they have PFAS in it, they'll be transparent about it because that's responding to consumers. And I know I just talked about the science, but I just also wanted to emphasize that I think a lot of power really um, is in the science itself and the idea that these people in random laboratories across the world might be providing some hope for us all, even if it's a long time from now.
Jumping off what Sharon said about corporations, I also do want to share that 3M has said that it's exiting the PFAS business, right? And I mean, 3M is a pretty diversified company. PFAS, was part of their business, but they make Post-its and all kinds of other products and face masks for COVID. So like this is a really diverse company, so it's probably easier for them to move away than like a chemical company. But, when they said they were leaving the PFAS business, they cited changing regulatory trends and changing stakeholder expectations. Now, I don't know what a stakeholder is. That's a little bit of a vague word, but sounds like it could be customers as well as, neighbors of the plants as well as, shareholders. And so if you're any one of those things, in that case, your voice was heard. And so it might be heard somewhere else as well.
Yeah, yeah, thank you. Thank you so much for this great discussion. We have had a lot of questions come through from our attendees, and I want to take the next few minutes to address as many of them as we can. So I'm first just going to ask about some products. One of the questions that Mike is asking is, what are the low-hanging fruits that someone could personally focus on to reduce or prevent exposure to PFAS?
I guess it would depend on what you mean by low hanging, because, as far as cost, for example, some things might be in somebody's price range that are not in somebody else's price range. But there are, filters you can put on your taps, the reverse osmosis filters that you can get in your house. That might be, one of the biggest things that you can do to limit or reduce your exposure. Other things that you can do are related to like the products that you use. You know, I think as a consumer, what I try to focus in on are things that I can inhale, things that I can ingest, or things that can get into my blood, right? Like I am less concerned personally about, for example, a waterproof raincoat, especially if I've got like layers of clothes underneath as far as exposure. But things that, you can ingest, either whether that's like a nonstick pan to swap that out to stainless steel or cast iron. As far as, things you can inhale, like those stain resistant sprays, you can inhale them, or things that, can touch your blood. And what I mean by that is like something like dental floss, where, if you floss and you bleed, that kind of thing can then maybe get into your bloodstream, or at least your blood may be touching a PFAS contaminated, or a PFAS, or a piece of floss that has PFAS on it. Another one that I haven't made yet, but I intend to, is bandages. I think there have been some studies finding PFAS in bandages. And I think just also generally just giving it a Google, like looking for studies. And I know that it's really hard to get them all. Like I know there have been studies that, say that people with high fish diets may have more PFAS in their bodies because if the rivers are contaminated, then maybe you get contaminated. Or, another one linked drinking tea to PFAS exposure. Now, I'm not really sure what it would be about the tea, whether it's the bag or the leaves or the water. But, I personally, after I read that, I stopped drinking tea. So those are just a few.
Thank you. I have a lot of questions coming in about different specific products and a lot of questions specifically about in-home water filters. So I'm just going to ask a general question and say as much as you like, but do you have advice for people who are looking to remove PFAS from their water via home filters?
So granular activated carbon is a bit cheaper than reverse osmosis. But they both, I mean, again, it's hard to say what's affordable to one person versus another. Um, but both solutions exist as home technologies and in two different ways. You could have like a full house treatment system, which is obviously going to be much more expensive. That's if you don't want to have PFAS in the shower and if you don't want it while brushing your teeth. Or if you want to just prioritize your kitchen, you can have like an under sink filter there. So that in some cases, that might be the more affordable solution for people. But I was also glancing at the questions and I saw somebody on this subject asked about Brita. I mean, not to single out a brand, but those types of like, carafe filters, they don't, they're not built to take out PFAS. What I've heard is that, and there's no really scientific study on it, I've just heard anecdotally that they might take out a certain percentage because they are carbon based, but it's not granular activated carbon. So if you're looking to remove PFAS, I would not rely on that type of countertop carafe filtration device.
Thank
Oh,
you.
to follow up just on the fish, because I'm seeing some comments come in about that. One thing that I personally do, and frankly, this is more me trying to be intuitive and not based on any study. So just to be clear, this is me tried sharing what I do for me is that I will eat fish still from the ocean, but not from a river, simply because the ocean is a lot bigger. So even if it is polluted, like I think it's more diluted versus a river or a lake is sort of a small concentrated. So I personally will eat saltwater fish, but not freshwater fish. Again, that's not based on any study. That's me sort of trying to intuit what the best risk is. But just because I'm seeing some comments about fish in the chat, I wanted to share that in case it's helpful to anybody.
Thank you. And I know I'm not going to get to all of these questions. I do want to point out again that we're adding some links in the chat and I will follow up tomorrow with more resources for a lot of this. So I'm going to move on to some questions about contamination. Let's see, this is Mike asking, in the Maine PFAS problem due to the state of Maine, due to agricultural application of sewage sludge, was the source of the sludge from remote industrial water treatment plants or from a more local rural water treatment plant?
It was mainly from paper mills, actually, because the state of Maine, it just has a huge number of paper mills due to the trees that were present in the river that could take down the logs back in the late 1700s. So paper mills really got established there. And they have on-site water treatment lagoons that basically they conduct what's called secondary wastewater treatment and kind of filter out like solids and bigger things, but not PFAS. And when that process occurs, some of the PFAS sticks to the semi-solids, the sludge, and some of it stays in the water. But the PFAS is not removed whatsoever. So that's mainly how it ended up in the sludges from paper mills.
Yeah, thank you. And I'll point out too, there are a lot of questions about specific places. And I think one of the things that Sharon and Rachel shared with me is includes the state by state link that we'll share in the chat there too. I think we have really time for one more question, so I hate to stop this, but let's just end with this kind of broad question for each of you. If readers take away one thing from your book, what would you like it to be?
In my mind, I think just that this is a massive environmental crisis. I think, and a massive health crisis. I think that other times a lot of, crises or a lot of massive problems are understood sort of more very easily and get picked up by the media. And, I'm part of the media, so I guess that's sort of me looking at myself here. But I just hope that people understand that this is a massive, massive problem that is only going to grow over the years as we learn more in scope, in scale, about health problems, about where the contamination is, about how long it lasts. And yes, there are solutions, and I'm not trying to discount that and leave everybody on a note of doom and gloom, but I just hope that people, do walk away with something saying, what's happening to Brenda is very sad, but at least to some degree, it might also be happening to you.
And one other thing I would take away from this is just the power of normal people to act and do something. And one thing I enjoy about these particular activists is, like I said, they've come from all over the country and they've become really close to each other. And it was actually at I think 2 years ago now, there was a national PFAS conference, and most of these people were together at the conference, and Brenda had yet another heart attack, and it was the activists. It was like Liz Rosenbaum and Emily Donovan. It was these people who were like caring for her, and they've really come together as a driving force. So yeah, the power of normal people to really affect change is something I would like to leave this discussion with.
I love it. Thank you so much. Thank you again. I really appreciate you giving your time for joining us today in this great discussion, and for all of the work that you're doing to inform us about the history and the dangers of PFAS contamination. We really appreciate you spending your time with us here today.
Thank you for having us.
Yes, thanks for helping to elevate this.
Absolutely. All right. Thank you again, Sharon and Rachel. Before we close, I want to invite my colleague, Mary Grant, to give us a brief overview of the latest PFAS news that we're tracking here at Food and Water Watch, and give you a related action that we can all take today to defend regulations protecting us from these toxic PFAS chemicals. Mary is Food and Water Watch's Public Water for All campaign director. Mary, thank you so much for being here with us today.
Thank you, Jeanine, and thank you again to Sharon and Rachel for such an insightful conversation. I especially loved hearing about the stories and the power of regular people who can take action and do the work for safe food and water. So you've heard from Sharon and Rachel about the history, the science, the dangers, and the stories about PFAS contamination. So we at Food and Water Watch want to leave you with a way to take action today to help address this crisis at the national level. So you heard just a moment ago about how EPA took action last year to begin to finally regulate toxic contamination from PFAS. So this came after decades of community organizing and public pressure, including from many of the local heroes you just heard about. So EPA finally adopted two, in particular, important regulations that begin to meaningfully address the PFAS crisis. Rachel went over this a little bit before, so I want to just cover it one more time. So the two main things that we've at Food and Water Watch have focused on is that EPA set limits on 6 types of PFAS in drinking water, and 2, it designated 2 types of PFAS as hazardous substances under the polluter pay rule. So unfortunately, these regulations are under attack. The chemical industry has sued to overturn them, and the Trump administration has hired many formal chemical industry lobbyists to fill important roles at the EPA. The bad news, as you heard about just a moment ago from Rachel, is that EPA has caved to some industry pressure to roll back protections on certain forms of PFAS in drinking water. So earlier this year, the EPA announced that it was rescinding regulations on 4 types of PFAS, including Gen X, and it's going to delay the compliance deadline on the remaining 2, PFOA and PFOS, until 2031. And just last month, the EPA began the process to roll back these regulations on PFAS in drinking water by asking a court to throw out the limits on those 4 types of PFAS. So by going through the court, the EPA appears to be circumventing the standard public input and rulemaking process to rescind those regulations. So we are asking people to take action to tell EPA Administrator Lee Zeldin to protect us from toxic PFAS in our drinking water by canceling these plans to gut the drinking water protections. He needs to stand up for public health and defend these regulations from those industry suits. The good news is that after many groups and people across the country, including more than 20,000 of our members, joined together and took action, last month the EPA announced that it would retain and defend the rule designating PFOA and PFOS as hazardous substances under the Superfund law. This important regulation grants the EPA more power to hold polluters accountable to pay for cleanup costs. So we know that public pressure works, so let's keep it on and tell EPA to cancel its deregulatory plans and uphold and not delay the protections to get PFAS out of our drinking water. We also need to keep the momentum on for stronger protections that regulates the entire class of PFAS and that stops PFAS pollution in the first place by banning all non-essential uses. Toxic PFAS, as you heard about, poisons our food, our water, our communities. So please take a moment and send a message to the EPA to demand that it protects our drinking water from PFAS. We will put a link into the chat box right now. So thanks again so much for joining us this evening, and I'll turn it back to Jeanine.
Thank you, Mary, for that important overview and that action that we can all take right now. As I've said, we'll be sending out more resources in an email tomorrow, along with the recording of this webinar. Thank you, everyone, for being here and for asking your important questions and for taking action with us. Please join me in thanking Sharon Udasin and Rachel Frazin for talking to us tonight and for writing this incredibly impactful book. PFAS are a problem we'll be dealing with for a long time, and we will continue to face big challenges of deregulation from this current administration. But it is in educating ourselves and continuing to take action that we can turn the tide. As Mary said, we've seen that public pressure works, and it is this kind of work, fighting to hold polluters accountable, that Food and Water Watch does every day. If you'd like to increase the impact we can have, please consider giving us a donation today. Your gift will go a long way to help get this work done. And as I said before, we don't take any corporate funding, so we are not beholden to any special interests other than the health of our communities and our planet. Our support comes from people like you, and a gift today will help us continue to do this important work. And if you would like to learn more about our work, you can register right now to join us for our next Livable Future Live events. Our November discussion will be about profiteering off the nation's food crisis, and our December discussion will feature stories of building community and resistance, featuring some impactful stories from our frontline volunteers. I hope you'll join me for both events. And lastly, please consider taking the short survey that will pop up on your screen in a minute. I would love to know what you thought of this event, how we can make it even better, and what kind of speakers and topics you'd like to hear from and about in the future. And as a bonus, I will be sending out a free Food and Water Watch reusable plant-based cup to 10 of you who fill out the survey today. Thank you again for joining me tonight. Please watch your email inboxes. I'll be sending out the recording of this event tomorrow. Take care and see you next time.